In the sweltering heat of June 68 AD, Emperor Nero, once the most powerful man in Rome, now found himself fleeing for his life, his horse's hooves pounding against the dusty earth as he galloped towards the villa of his faithful servant, Phaon. The Roman Empire, which had once trembled at the mere mention of his name, was now on the brink of collapse, its people rising up against their tyrannical leader. Nero's reign, marked by extravagance and brutality, had finally come to an end, and the Senate had declared him an enemy of the state. As he rode, the sounds of chaos and destruction filled the air, the clash of steel, the cries of the wounded, and the roar of the mob. The once mighty emperor, now a fugitive, clutched a small, leather-bound box to his chest, containing the few remaining treasures he had managed to salvage from his crumbling empire. The box, adorned with intricate gold filigree, held a collection of precious gems, including a rare 20-carat emerald, said to have been mined from the depths of Egypt. This emerald, known as the Star of Nero, was rumored to possess mystical powers, and its value was estimated to be around 100,000 denarii, a small fortune in those days. As Nero rode, the emerald seemed to glow with an otherworldly light, as if sensing the desperation of its owner. The Roman Empire, which had once spanned across 3 continents, was now on the verge of collapse, its people suffering from poverty, famine, and disease. The Roman Senate, once a symbol of power and wisdom, had been reduced to a mere puppet show, with Nero pulling the strings from behind the scenes. But to understand how we got here, we must delve into the complexities of Nero's life, a tale of rise and fall, of grandeur and decay. Born on December 15, 37 AD, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, later known as Nero, was the son of Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus and Agrippina the Younger. His early life was marked by tragedy, with his father's death when Nero was just 3 years old. His mother, Agrippina, would play a significant role in shaping his future, manipulating the Roman Emperor Claudius into adopting Nero as his own son. On February 25, 50 AD, Nero was officially adopted by Claudius, and his name was changed to Nero Claudius Caesar Drusus Germanicus. This adoption would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to Nero's downfall. As we explore the life of Emperor Nero, we find ourselves in the midst of a tumultuous period in Roman history. The Roman Empire, founded by Augustus in 27 BC, had grown into a vast and complex entity, with a population of over 50 million people. The empire was divided into several provinces, each governed by a Roman prefect, and its economy was driven by a combination of agriculture, trade, and conquest. The Roman legions, with their disciplined ranks and mighty eagles, were the symbol of Roman power, and their conquests had brought great wealth and prosperity to the empire. However, beneath the surface of this grandeur, corruption, decadence, and inequality simmered, waiting to erupt into the chaos that would eventually consume Nero's reign. The year 54 AD marked the beginning of Nero's reign, as he ascended to the throne at the tender age of 17. Initially, his rule was marked by a period of relative stability and peace, with the Roman Senate and the people of Rome holding high hopes for the young emperor. The Roman Senate, composed of 600 members, was the governing body of the Roman Empire, and its members were responsible for advising the emperor and passing laws. The people of Rome, on the other hand, were a diverse and vibrant population, with a mix of merchants, artisans, and laborers. They lived in a city of grandeur, with its marble temples, public baths, and amphitheaters, and they were entertained by gladiatorial contests, theatre performances, and public spectacles. As Nero's reign progressed, however, his true nature began to reveal itself, and his rule became characterized by brutality, extravagance, and megalomania. The construction of the Golden House, a sprawling palace complex that epitomized Nero's excesses, was just one example of his lavish spending. The Golden House, designed by the architects Severus and Sella, was a marvel of engineering, with its rotating dining rooms, artificial lakes, and intricate mosaics. The palace was said to have cost over 100 million denarii, a staggering sum that would be equivalent to billions of dollars today. The Roman people, already struggling to make ends meet, were forced to foot the bill for Nero's extravagances, and their discontent grew with each passing day. The Great Fire of Rome, which occurred on July 18, 64 AD, was another pivotal event in Nero's reign. The fire, which raged for 6 days and 7 nights, destroyed much of the city, leaving thousands of people homeless and without livelihoods. Nero, who was away in Antium at the time, returned to Rome to find the city in ruins. He blamed the fire on the Christians, a minority group in Rome, and used the disaster as an excuse to persecute them. The Christians, who were already viewed with suspicion by the Roman authorities, were subjected to brutal torture, executions, and other forms of persecution. The fire also provided Nero with an opportunity to rebuild Rome in his own image, with the construction of the Golden House and other grand projects. As the night wore on, Nero's thoughts turned to the events that had led him to this moment. He thought of his mother, Agrippina, who had been instrumental in his rise to power, but whom he had eventually turned against. He thought of his wife, Poppaea Sabina, who had been his partner in crime, but whom he had also eventually discarded. And he thought of the Roman people, who had once loved and admired him, but whom he had ultimately betrayed. The weight of his actions bore down upon him, and for a moment he felt the crushing burden of his own guilt. The sound of horses' hooves grew fainter, and the darkness closed in around him like a shroud. Nero's eyes, once bright with ambition, now dimmed with the realization that his time was running out. The silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the sound of his own ragged breathing, and the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. In the year 37 AD, the Roman Empire was a vast and complex entity, spanning across 3 continents and comprising a population of approximately 50 million people. At its helm was Emperor Caligula, a man notorious for his extravagance and ruthlessness. It was during this tumultuous period that a young Agrippina the Younger, mother of Nero, began to navigate the treacherous landscape of Roman politics. Born in 15 AD, Agrippina was a member of the illustrious Julio-Claudian dynasty and had been raised with the utmost care and attention, her every move calculated to ensure her family's continued influence. As a child, Agrippina had been surrounded by the opulence and grandeur of the imperial court, where she developed a keen sense of ambition and a strong will to succeed. Her father, Germanicus, was a highly respected Roman general, and her mother, Agrippina the Elder, was a woman of great intelligence and cunning. It was from these 2 individuals that Agrippina the Younger inherited her remarkable charm, intelligence, and determination. By the time she reached adulthood, Agrippina had become a woman of considerable beauty and poise, with a quick mind and a sharp tongue. She was well versed in the arts of politics and was known for her ability to effortlessly manipulate those around her. In 39 AD, Agrippina married Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, a wealthy and influential Roman nobleman, with whom she had a son, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, later known as Nero. The marriage was a strategic one, aimed at strengthening Agrippina's position within the imperial court. Ahenobarbus was a man of limited intellect and questionable morals, but he possessed a noble lineage and significant wealth, making him an attractive match for Agrippina. Despite his shortcomings, Ahenobarbus was a loyal husband and father, and he provided Agrippina with the stability and security she needed to pursue her ambitions. As the years passed, Agrippina's influence within the imperial court continued to grow. She became a close friend and advisor to Emperor Caligula, who valued her intelligence and cunning. However, their friendship was short-lived, as Caligula's increasing paranoia and brutality eventually led to a rift between the 2. In 41 AD, Caligula was assassinated and Claudius, Agrippina's uncle, ascended to the throne. Claudius was a wise and just ruler who recognized Agrippina's abilities and appointed her as one of his trusted advisors. It was during this period that Agrippina's son, Nero, began to receive the education and training necessary to prepare him for a future role in Roman politics. Nero's early life was marked by privilege and luxury. He was born on December 15, 37 AD, in the town of Antium, and was raised in the imperial court, surrounded by the finest tutors and scholars of the time. His mother, Agrippina, ensured that he received the best possible education, with a focus on rhetoric, philosophy, and the arts. Nero proved to be a quick and talented student, with a particular aptitude for music and poetry. However, his childhood was also marked by tragedy, as his father, Ahenobarbus, died when Nero was just 3 years old. This event had a profound impact on Nero, who would later struggle with the consequences of his own actions. In 50 AD, Agrippina arranged for Nero to be adopted by Emperor Claudius, who had recently married Agrippina. This move was a strategic one, aimed at securing Nero's position as heir to the throne. Claudius, who had no male heirs of his own, was willing to adopt Nero as his son, and the two formed a close bond. As Nero grew older, he became increasingly involved in the affairs of state, often accompanying Claudius to meetings with the Roman Senate and other high-ranking officials. It was during this period that Nero began to develop his own sense of ambition and desire for power, which would eventually lead him down a path of destruction and chaos. The Roman Empire, during this time, was a complex and multifaceted entity, with a vast and diverse population. The city of Rome was a bustling metropolis, filled with people from all corners of the empire. The streets were narrow and winding, lined with shops, temples, and public buildings. The air was thick with the smells of food, incense, and human waste. It was a city of stark contrasts, where the wealthy elite lived in luxury and the poor struggled to survive. Despite these challenges, the city was a hub of cultural and intellectual activity, with scholars, poets, and philosophers gathering to discuss the latest ideas and discoveries. As Nero's adoption was finalized, Agrippina's position within the imperial court became even more secure. She was now the mother of the heir apparent, and her influence over Claudius continued to grow. However, not everyone was pleased with Agrippina's rising star. Many members of the Roman Senate and other noble families viewed her as a power-hungry manipulator who was using her son to further her own ambitions. These tensions would eventually boil over, leading to a series of events that would change the course of Roman history forever. In the midst of this intrigue, Nero was growing up, surrounded by the opulence and excess of the imperial court. He was a talented young man with a passion for the arts and a desire to make a name for himself. However, he was also spoiled and entitled, with a sense of self-importance that would eventually lead him to make disastrous decisions. As the years passed, Nero's relationship with his mother, Agrippina, would become increasingly complex, with the two engaging in a delicate dance of power and manipulation. This dynamic would have far-reaching consequences, shaping the course of Nero's reign and ultimately leading to his downfall. The Roman Empire, at this time, was a place of great uncertainty and upheaval. The reign of Emperor Claudius was marked by a series of challenges, including wars with neighboring tribes, economic troubles, and internal power struggles. Despite these difficulties, Claudius remained a popular and effective leader, known for his fairness and wisdom. However, his advanced age and poor health made it clear that his reign would not last forever, and the question of succession was becoming increasingly pressing. It was in this context that Nero, now a young adult, began to emerge as a major player in Roman politics, with his mother, Agrippina, guiding him every step of the way. As the years went by, Nero's education and training continued, with a focus on preparing him for the demands of imperial rule. He was taught by the finest scholars and philosophers of the time, and was encouraged to develop his skills in rhetoric, politics, and military strategy. Nero proved to be a quick and able student, with a particular aptitude for music and poetry. However, his privileged upbringing and lack of real-world experience would eventually prove to be a hindrance, as he struggled to cope with the complexities and challenges of ruling the Roman Empire. In 54 AD, Emperor Claudius died, and Nero, at the age of 17, ascended to the throne. This event marked the beginning of a new era in Roman history, one that would be characterized by turmoil, upheaval, and ultimately tragedy. As Nero took his first steps as emperor, he was surrounded by a cast of characters who would shape the course of his reign, including his mother, Agrippina, his tutor, Seneca, and the prefect, Burrus. These individuals would play a crucial role in shaping Nero's decisions and actions, and would ultimately contribute to his downfall. The city of Rome, at this time, was a place of great excitement and anticipation. The accession of a new emperor was always a significant event, and the people of Rome were eager to see what the future held. Nero, with his youthful energy and charisma, was seen as a breath of fresh air, a chance for the Roman Empire to start anew. However, as the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, it became clear that Nero's reign would be marked by a series of challenges and controversies. The Roman Senate, in particular, was wary of Nero's inexperience and his tendency to rely on his mother, Agrippina, for advice. As Nero navigated the complexities of imperial rule, he was forced to confront the harsh realities of power and politics. He was surrounded by advisors and courtiers, each with their own agendas and motivations. The Roman Empire was a vast and complex entity, with a multitude of problems and challenges. Nero's ability to address these issues and to provide effective leadership would ultimately determine the success or failure of his reign. However, as the months passed, it became clear that Nero was not equipped to deal with the demands of ruling the empire. His lack of experience, combined with his own personal demons, would eventually lead him down a path of destruction and chaos. The Roman Empire, during this time, was a place of great cultural and intellectual activity. The city of Rome was a hub of artistic and literary expression, with poets, musicians, and philosophers gathering to discuss the latest ideas and discoveries. Nero, with his love of music and poetry, was a natural fit for this world. He was a talented young man, with a passion for the arts and a desire to make a name for himself. However, his own personal insecurities, combined with the pressures of ruling the empire, would eventually lead him to make disastrous decisions. The consequences of these actions would be far-reaching, shaping the course of Roman history and ultimately leading to Nero's downfall. As the years passed, Nero's reign became increasingly marked by turmoil and controversy. The Roman Senate, which had initially been supportive of Nero, began to turn against him. The people of Rome, who had initially been enthusiastic about their new emperor, began to lose faith. Nero's own personal life was also marked by tragedy, as he struggled to cope with the loss of his mother, Agrippina, and the collapse of his marriage to Octavia. These events would eventually lead to a series of catastrophic decisions, including the Great Fire of Rome and the subsequent persecution of the Christians. The Great Fire of Rome, which occurred in 64 AD, was a devastating event that would change the course of Nero's reign forever. The fire, which burned for 6 days and 7 nights, destroyed much of the city, leaving thousands of people homeless and without livelihoods. Nero, who was away from Rome at the time, returned to find the city in ruins. He was met with a mixture of anger and desperation, as the people of Rome demanded that he take action to rebuild and restore their city. Nero, who was already struggling to cope with the pressures of ruling the empire, was faced with a series of impossible decisions. He would eventually decide to blame the fire on the Christians, a minority group in Rome, and to use the disaster as an excuse to persecute them. The persecution of the Christians, which followed the Great Fire of Rome, was a dark and tragic event in Roman history. Nero, who had already been struggling to maintain control and order in the city, saw the Christians as a convenient scapegoat for the disaster. He used the fire as an excuse to launch a brutal and systematic campaign of persecution against the Christians, who were seen as a threat to the stability and security of the empire. This event would ultimately lead to a series of catastrophic consequences, including the destruction of the Christian community in Rome and the loss of thousands of innocent lives. As Nero's reign drew to a close, the Roman Empire was plagued by a series of disasters, including a devastating civil war and a severe economic crisis. The people of Rome, who had once been enthusiastic about their emperor, had lost all faith in him. The Roman Senate, which had initially been supportive of Nero, had turned against him. Nero, who was now isolated and alone, was faced with the ultimate reality of his own mortality. He would eventually take his own life, in 68 AD, marking the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty and the beginning of a new era in Roman history. The legacy of Nero, which has endured for centuries, is a complex and multifaceted one. He was a talented and charismatic leader who was capable of great beauty and great ugliness. His reign, which was marked by turmoil and controversy, would ultimately lead to a series of catastrophic consequences, including the destruction of the Christian community in Rome and the loss of thousands of innocent lives. However, Nero's impact on Roman history is undeniable, and his story continues to fascinate and captivate people to this day. As we reflect on the life and reign of Nero, we are reminded of the enduring power of human ambition and the devastating consequences of unchecked power and greed. As the Roman Empire teetered on the brink of chaos, Nero's ascent to power seemed almost inevitable. By 54 AD, he had become the fifth emperor of the Roman Empire, with his mother Agrippina the Younger playing a significant role in his accession to the throne. The Roman Senate and the people of Rome held high hopes for the young emperor, who was just 17 years old at the time. Nero's early reign was marked by a period of relative stability and peace, with the Roman Empire's population of 50 million people looking to him for leadership. The year 54 AD was a pivotal one for Nero, as he began to consolidate his power and establish his own identity as a ruler. He surrounded himself with advisors such as Seneca, who would later become a key figure in his reign. Seneca, a Stoic philosopher, had been appointed by Agrippina to guide Nero in his early years as emperor. As Nero grew in power and confidence, he began to assert his own authority, often in ways that were at odds with the traditional values of the Roman Empire. The Roman Senate, which had initially supported Nero's accession to the throne, began to grow wary of his increasingly autocratic tendencies. By 55 AD, Nero's relationship with the Roman Senate had become increasingly strained. The Senate, which had long been the seat of power in Rome, felt threatened by Nero's growing authority and his tendency to bypass their advice. Nero, on the other hand, saw the Senate as outdated and inefficient, and he began to take steps to limit their power. This tension between Nero and the Senate would ultimately contribute to the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, which had ruled Rome since the time of Augustus. As the years passed, Nero's reign became increasingly marked by tyranny, extravagance, and a series of catastrophic events that would ultimately lead to his downfall. One of the most significant events of Nero's reign was the Great Fire of Rome, which occurred in 64 AD. The fire, which lasted for 6 days and 7 nights, destroyed much of the city, leaving tens of thousands of people homeless. Nero, who was away from Rome at the time, returned to the city to find it in ruins. He blamed the fire on the Christians, a minority group in Rome, and used the disaster as an excuse to persecute them. The fire also provided Nero with an opportunity to rebuild Rome in his own image, with the construction of the Golden House, a sprawling palace complex that epitomized his extravagance and excess. The Golden House, which was designed by the architects Severus and Sella, was a massive complex that covered over 100 acres of land. It was adorned with gold, ivory, and precious gems, and it featured a massive dome that was designed to rotate, allowing the sun to shine in from different angles. The Golden House was a symbol of Nero's wealth and power, and it became a source of controversy and resentment among the Roman people. The construction of the Golden House was a massive undertaking that required the labor of thousands of workers who toiled for years to complete the project. The cost of the Golden House was staggering, with some estimates suggesting that it cost over 100 million sestertii to build. As Nero's reign drew to a close, the Roman Empire was plagued by a series of disasters, including a devastating civil war and a severe economic crisis. The Roman people, who had once looked to Nero as a source of hope and stability, now saw him as a tyrant and a menace. Nero's popularity had begun to wane, and he became increasingly isolated and paranoid. He began to see conspiracies everywhere, and he became convinced that the Roman Senate was plotting against him. In 68 AD, Nero's fears were realized, as a group of senators led by Galba rose up against him. Nero was overthrown and forced to flee Rome, and he took his own life on June 9, 68 AD, marking the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. The legacy of Nero is complex and multifaceted, with some historians viewing him as a tyrannical and brutal leader, while others see him as a visionary and a patron of the arts. Regardless, Nero's impact on Roman history is undeniable, and his story continues to fascinate and captivate people to this day. The Roman Empire, which had once been the epitome of power and stability, was now on the brink of collapse. The year 68 AD marked the beginning of a period of civil war and instability, as different factions vied for power and control. The Roman people, who had once been so proud and confident, were now faced with the very real possibility of chaos and destruction. As the Roman Empire teetered on the brink of collapse, the people of Rome were left to wonder what the future held. Would the empire be able to recover from the disasters of Nero's reign, or would it succumb to the forces of chaos and destruction? The answer, much like the fate of Nero himself, remained uncertain. The Roman people could only wait and see what the future held, as the empire stumbled towards an uncertain destiny. The silence that followed Nero's death was oppressive, a heavy stillness that seemed to weigh on the city like a physical force. It was as if the very fate of Rome hung in the balance, waiting to see what the future would bring. And as the darkness closed in, the people of Rome could only whisper a single, haunting phrase: "What next?" The sound of their whispers seemed to echo through the empty streets, a faint murmur that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. It was a sound that seemed to capture the very essence of the moment, a sound that seemed to say that nothing would ever be the same again. In the summer of 64 AD, as Rome sweltered under the weight of its own decadence, a spark ignited that would set the city ablaze and change the course of Emperor Nero's reign forever. The Great Fire of Rome erupted on the night of July 18th amidst the crowded streets of the Circus Maximus, where thousands had gathered to witness the spectacle of racing chariots. The flames, hungry and wild, consumed wooden buildings and shops, sending plumes of smoke spiraling up into the night sky. For 6 days and 7 nights, fire raged through the heart of the city, reducing much of Rome to ash and ruin. It is estimated that over 2/3 of the city was destroyed, leaving countless citizens homeless and desperate. While chaos reigned, Nero was said to be at his villa in Antium, a coastal retreat that offered a brief respite from the tumult of his capital. But he was not oblivious to the inferno consuming his city. In the early hours of the fire, rumors began to circulate that he had sung and played his lyre while watching Rome burn, a tale designed to paint him as an indifferent tyrant. It was a narrative that would stick, fed by the flames of discontent that grew among the populace. The historian Tacitus would later write that the world was left to wonder how a man who had once promised to govern with virtue had become a figure of such contempt. In the wake of the fire, Nero sought to shift the blame from himself. He turned his gaze to the Christians, a small but increasingly visible minority in Rome. On July 24th, 64 AD, he proclaimed that they were the source of the misfortune that had befallen the city. The persecution that followed was brutal and unrelenting. Christians were rounded up, tortured, and executed in horrific ways. Some were impaled on stakes and set alight to illuminate Nero's gardens at night. The Roman historian Suetonius documented this dark chapter, noting that many were thrown to the dogs, others were dressed in the skins of wild beasts and torn to pieces by dogs, while some were crucified. As the city smoldered, Nero seized the opportunity to reshape Rome in his vision. He commissioned the construction of the Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a sprawling palace complex that would epitomize his extravagant tastes. The very land on which it was built was seized from the ruins, a physical manifestation of his excesses rising from the ashes of destruction. The Golden House featured vast gardens, a lake, and a colossal statue of Nero himself, a testament to his megalomania. Pliny the Elder would later describe the opulence of the palace, stating that it was a place where the very air was perfumed with the scents of exotic flowers and spices. Yet this ambition was not met with universal acclaim. The Roman Senate, once hopeful for Nero's leadership, now began to conspire against him, fueled by resentment and fear. In the winter of 65 AD, as the city began to recover from the fire, whispers of discontent grew louder. A conspiracy emerged, led by Gaius Calpurnius Piso, who sought to unseat Nero and restore the Republic to its former glory. The conspiracy, known as the Pisonian conspiracy, aimed to assassinate the emperor and replace him with a more favorable leader. Among the conspirators were notable figures such as the philosopher Seneca, who, despite having served as Nero's tutor and advisor, found himself torn between loyalty and the rising tide of tyranny. The stakes were high. On April 19th, 65 AD, the conspiracy was uncovered, leading to a brutal crackdown. Nero's paranoia reached new heights as he ordered the execution of those implicated, including the philosopher Seneca, who was forced to take his own life. In a letter to his mother, Seneca expressed his sorrow, writing, "I have lived long enough for both of us, dear mother. I have nothing left to give but this life of mine, which has become a burden." He died with dignity, leaving a legacy of thought that would outlast the turmoil of his time. As Nero's grip on power tightened, he became increasingly isolated. The emperor sought solace in the arts, often performing in public spectacles, which elicited both admiration and scorn from the Roman populace. His performances were met with mixed reactions. Some praised his talents, while others viewed them as a further sign of his descent into madness. The Roman poet Lucan, who had once admired Nero, would later write scathingly of the emperor's arrogance, lamenting that the stage became the throne and the lyre became the sword. Yet, as Rome began to heal, the scars of the Great Fire and the subsequent betrayals ran deep. The populace grew weary of Nero's excesses, and discontent simmered just below the surface. The economic strain of rebuilding the city weighed heavily on the shoulders of the citizens, many of whom had lost everything in the flames. It was during this time that food shortages became rampant, with grain prices skyrocketing to unprecedented levels. In 66 AD, the price of wheat rose to nearly 100 denarii per modius, a staggering amount for the average Roman citizen, who often struggled to get by on a mere 1,000 denarii a year. The discontent reached a boiling point in 68 AD. The legions stationed in Gaul, feeling neglected and disillusioned with Nero's rule, declared their support for a new emperor, Gaius Julius Vindex. The rebellion was swift and fierce, and Nero, sensing the tide had turned against him, fled Rome in a panic. His loyalists deserted him, and as he rode through the countryside, the weight of his failures pressed heavily upon him. In a letter to his friend and confidant, he lamented, "I have lost all that was dear to me. My glory has turned to dust, and my people have become my enemies." On June 9th, 68 AD, as the walls of the city closed in around him, Nero found refuge in a villa outside Rome. It was there that he faced the end he had long feared. Surrounded by the echoes of betrayal and the spectre of his own tyranny, he came to a fateful decision. In a moment of despair, with the cries of the approaching guards ringing in his ears, he drew a dagger across his throat. His last words, according to tradition, were a haunting echo of his once grand aspirations. "What an artist dies in me." With Nero's death, the Julio-Claudian dynasty came to an abrupt end. The empire, now teetering on the brink of collapse, plunged into chaos as civil war erupted. Rome had witnessed the rise of an emperor whose reign began with promise, but was marred by cruelty and excess. As the flames of the Great Fire faded into memory, the legacy of Nero remained a complex tapestry of art, ambition, and tyranny, a reminder of the fine line between greatness and destruction. In the aftermath of his downfall, the Roman Empire struggled to find its footing. The power vacuum left by Nero's death led to a period known as the Year of the Four Emperors, as rival claimants vied for control. The chaos that ensued would reshape the empire and set the stage for a new era of leadership. Historians would debate Nero's legacy for centuries, some viewing him as a tyrant whose reign was a cautionary tale, while others would see glimpses of brilliance amidst the shadows of his madness. As the embers of Nero's reign flickered out, the people of Rome began to rebuild their lives. The scars of the past remained, etched into the fabric of the city, a testament to the resilience and strength of its citizens. In the shadow of the Colosseum, where gladiators would one day fight for glory, the echoes of a turbulent history lingered. The story of Nero, with all its intrigue and tragedy, would be told and retold for generations to come. A saga of ambition, betrayal, and the human cost of power. The year was 68 AD, and the winds of discord swept through the Roman Empire like a restless tide. The once gilded halls of power echoed with whispers of betrayal, and the very foundations of Nero's reign trembled under the weight of discontent. The empire, now a shadow of its former self, found itself teetering on the brink of collapse, and the emperor, once revered as a symbol of Roman strength and cultural renaissance, faced an insurmountable tide of dissent. In the heart of Rome, disillusionment festered as the Senate, once a bastion of imperial authority, turned against Nero. The Pisonian conspiracy had birthed a coalition of disgruntled senators, military leaders, and former allies, all united by a singular desire to see Nero deposed. It was a plot that rippled through the city like a clandestine current, gathering momentum with each passing day. Among those who conspired against Nero was Gaius Calpurnius Piso, a man of considerable influence, whose vision of a Rome free of tyranny resonated deeply with the people. The Senate, having once indulged Nero's whims, now sensed an opportunity to reclaim its authority, and the stakes were perilously high. Meanwhile, Nero remained ensconced in his opulent world, surrounded by sycophants who sang his praises and perpetuated the illusion of his invulnerability. The tragic irony lay in his detachment from the reality unfolding beyond the lavish walls of the Golden House. Although he had orchestrated grand spectacles to entertain the populace, such as gladiatorial games at the Circus Maximus, the laughter had begun to fade, replaced by murmurs of outrage and resentment. The populace had grown weary of excessive taxation, forced labor for his extravagant projects, and the brutal suppression of dissent. Unbeknownst to him, the city was a powder keg, ready to explode. As conspirators gathered in secret, they plotted Nero's demise with an intensity that mirrored the fervor of the Roman populace. It was in the dead of a winter night, around February 65 AD, that the details of their plan crystallized. The conspirators hoped to strike during the upcoming Ludi Romani festival, a time when Nero would be occupied with performances. The timing was deliberate, the stage set for a coup that would send shockwaves through the empire. Tacitus, the historian, would later detail the audacity of the plot, revealing how those who had once basked in Nero's favor now sought to unseat him through a combination of cunning and courage. Yet, even as the conspirators took their positions, the tide of fortune shifted. Nero's relentless pursuit of loyalty had led him to trust those who were, in truth, plotting against him. In a cruel twist of fate, one of the key conspirators, a man named Annius Vinicianus, revealed the plan to Nero, motivated by fear and self-preservation. The betrayal sent ripples of panic through the ranks of the conspirators, and Nero, fueled by rage, unleashed a brutal crackdown. The following days saw a harrowing series of executions, as he hunted down those he believed had conspired against him. The blood of senators and nobles stained the very streets that had once celebrated his rule. As the empire descended into chaos, Nero's paranoia reached fever pitch. He ordered the arrest of even those who had merely spoken ill of him, accusing them of conspiracy. The streets of Rome, once filled with the jubilant sounds of music and laughter, now echoed with the cries of the condemned. The high walls of the Golden House, built upon the ashes of the Great Fire, became a prison of fear, isolation, and impending doom. Nero's mental state deteriorated. He was haunted by visions of betrayal, and his once charismatic demeanor morphed into that of a tyrant, grasping desperately to maintain control. In the summer of that fateful year, the winds of rebellion swirled with renewed vigor. The armies stationed in the provinces grew restless, their loyalty wavering as rumors of Nero's madness spread. The legions stationed in Gaul declared their allegiance to Galba, a governor who embodied the hope for a new Rome, one free from tyranny. The news sent shockwaves through the empire, and the Senate, sensing the moment had come, formally proclaimed Nero a public enemy. The very institution that had once embraced him now sought his destruction. As the sun set on the turbulent days of June, Nero found himself isolated, a once mighty emperor reduced to a fugitive. He fled Rome, seeking refuge in the countryside, but the whispers of his downfall followed him like a shadow. The remnants of his supporters, scattered and fearful, abandoned him one by one. The emperor who had reveled in the opulence of the Golden House now found himself on the outskirts of the empire he had once ruled with an iron fist. In the midst of this turmoil, a defining moment approached, a confrontation that would alter the course of history. Nero, now a man on the run, was guided to a villa by a loyal freedman named Phaon, who had once served as his confidant. It was there that the weight of despair bore down upon him, and the reality of his situation became painfully clear. The echoes of betrayal resounded in his mind, and he grappled with the futility of his reign. The vast empire that had once bowed to him now sought his head, and his dreams of grandeur crumbled before his eyes. On June 9th, 68 AD, a fateful decision loomed. Nero, desperate and cornered, resolved to take his own life rather than face the ignominy of capture. He had been a performer on the grand stage of Rome, But now, in the silence of the villa, he prepared to exit the world he had once dominated. He grasped the Star of Nero, a magnificent emerald that had been a symbol of his wealth and power, and contemplated the legacy he would leave behind. In his final moments, he uttered the words, "What an artist dies in me," a lament for the art, the music, and the performances that had once defined his reign. In that quiet villa, the echoes of applause faded, replaced by the stark reality of his isolation. With a steady hand, he plunged a dagger into his own throat, abandoning the world that had once celebrated him. Nero's death marked the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, a poignant turn in Roman history. The empire, now bereft of its flamboyant emperor, plunged into a period of civil war known as the Year of the Four Emperors. The chaos that followed would reshape the very fabric of Roman governance, as rival claimants surged forth, each vying for power and control over the fractured empire. The legacy of Nero was as complex as the man himself. Some would remember him as a tyrant who unleashed persecution upon the Christians, while others would acknowledge his contributions to the arts and architecture, including the reconstruction of Rome after the Great Fire. Historians like Tacitus and Suetonius would grapple with the duality of his reign, painting a portrait of a ruler who embodied both the heights of creativity and the depths of cruelty. In the years that followed, the tale of Nero would resonate through the annals of history, a cautionary saga of ambition, excess, and the inevitable fall from grace. The echoes of his rule would linger in the minds of those who followed, a reminder of the volatility of power and the fragility of human ambition. The empire, now in disarray, would eventually find a new path, but the ghost of Nero, a man who once danced upon the stage of history, would forever haunt the corridors of power. Yet, even in his demise, Nero's story was not forgotten. The fascination with his life, his excesses, and the grandeur of his ambitions would immortalize him in the collective memory of Rome. His name would become synonymous with tyranny, and the tales of his extravagance would inspire both fear and intrigue for generations to come. The curtain had fallen on the tragic drama of Nero, but the echoes of his life would resonate through the ages, a reminder of the delicate balance between power and downfall. As the empire attempted to rebuild from the ashes of his reign, the lessons learned from Nero's tumultuous rule would shape the future of Rome, forever altering the course of its history. The tides of time would wash over the remnants of his legacy, but the memory of a boy who became emperor, and the man who danced with tyranny, would remain etched in the annals of time, a testament to the complexities of human nature and the relentless pursuit of power. In the silence that followed his death, the world shifted once more. The narrative of Rome continued, reshaped by the echoes of Nero's reign, a blend of tragedy and ambition that would forever hold a mirror to the human experience. As the dust settled in the wake of Nero's chaotic reign, the Roman Empire found itself at a precipice, balancing between ruin and renewal. The once mighty capital, a tapestry of stone and ambition, lay marred of betrayal and violence. The air was thick with the lingering scent of smoke from the fires that had consumed vast sections of the city and the bitterness of broken dreams. Many Romans wandered through the charred remains of their homes, searching for remnants of their past lives amid the rubble. The cries of the displaced echoed through the streets, mingling with the whispers of those who dared to dream of a new beginning. In the weeks following Nero's demise, the political landscape was fraught with uncertainty. The Senate, long subjugated under the weight of Nero's tyranny, now faced a critical challenge: how to restore order to a city that had become a shadow of its former self. In the weeks that followed, the Senate convened to discuss the future of Rome. Senators who had once bowed to Nero's whims now found themselves grappling with the question of legitimacy. Who would guide the empire from the ashes? The spectre of civil war loomed large, threatening to plunge the city into further chaos. As the sun rose over the battered city, it illuminated the Golden House, Nero's opulent palace, which had come to symbolize the excess and corruption of his reign. The structure, an architectural marvel of its time, now stood as a grotesque reminder of the emperor's hubris. The public grew restless, resentful of the lavishness that had persisted even in the face of unimaginable suffering. In the months that followed, the Senate debated whether to preserve the Golden House as a monument to Nero's folly or dismantle it and reclaim the land for the people. The decision weighed heavily on their minds, a reflection of their own fears and aspirations. While some sought to rebuild, others felt the weight of loss more acutely. Families mourned the loved ones they had lost during the tumultuous final days of Nero's rule. Many had perished in the violence of the Pisonian conspiracy, while others were victims of the brutal reprisals that had followed. The historian Tacitus recorded that the death toll was staggering, with thousands executed, their bodies left to rot in the streets, as a grim warning to any who dared to oppose the new order. The memory of those lives lost became a haunting presence, a constant reminder of the fragility of power and the cost of ambition. In the midst of this turmoil, the Christian community, already a target during Nero's reign, faced an uncertain future. The fires that had ravaged Rome also ignited a fierce wave of persecution against them, fueled by Nero's scapegoating. The historian Suetonius noted that many were seized, tortured, and executed in the most horrific ways. The streets were filled with the cries of the innocent, their suffering echoing through the annals of history. Yet, in the darkness of oppression, the seeds of resilience began to take root. The survivors banded together, vowing to honor the memory of the fallen by continuing their faith in the face of unimaginable adversity. In the aftermath of the chaos, a new leader emerged. Galba, a seasoned general who had garnered support among the legions. In June of 68 AD, he was proclaimed emperor, his ascension marked by a sense of cautious optimism. Yet even as he took the reins, the scars of Nero's reign lingered, and the new emperor faced the daunting task of uniting a fractured realm. Galba's leadership was met with mixed emotions. The Senate, eager for reform, welcomed him as a beacon of stability. However, the legions, still reeling from the chaos, demanded rewards for their loyalty, leading to a precarious balance of power. The streets of Rome, once teeming with the vibrancy of life, now carried an air of uncertainty. The merchants who had thrived during Nero's rule faced a stark reality. The economy was in tatters, inflation rampant, and the price of grain soared to unprecedented heights. In the marketplace, the cries of vendors hawking their wares grew desperate, as fewer people had the means to purchase even the most basic necessities. A loaf of bread, once a simple staple, now commanded prices that many could not afford. The stark contrast between wealth and poverty grew ever more pronounced, and the resentment among the populace simmered just beneath the surface. Meanwhile, the architecture of Rome bore the brunt of the chaos. Reconstruction efforts began in earnest, with artisans and laborers laboring tirelessly to restore the city to its former glory. The rebuilding of temples, forums, and public spaces became a rallying cry for the people as they sought to reclaim their identity. The flaking marble of the Forum Romanum was polished, and the echoes of laughter and debate began to return to the Senate House. Yet, in the shadow of reconstruction, the spectre of past tyranny loomed large, reminding citizens of the fragility of their hard-won freedom. In this tense atmosphere, the legacy of Nero began to take shape, not only in the physical remnants of his reign, but also in the cultural fabric of Roman society. Artists, poets, and philosophers emerged from the shadows, inspired by the tumultuous events. The chaos had birthed a new wave of creativity, as people sought to make sense of their experiences through art and literature. The historian Pliny the Elder noted the rise of public performances, where stories of valor and betrayal were recounted, each tale a reflection of the collective memory of the people. As the months turned into years, the healing process continued, albeit slowly. The scars of Nero's reign would not fade easily, but the resilience of the Roman spirit began to shine through. The people of Rome sought to rebuild not only their city, but also their sense of community and purpose. The remnants of the Golden House were gradually repurposed, transformed into spaces for public gatherings and discussions, an ironic twist of fate for a structure that had once symbolized excess and corruption. In the spring of 69 AD, the Ludi Romanae festival returned, a time-honored celebration that had been marred by the bloodshed of the previous year. The streets buzzed with anticipation as citizens adorned themselves in vibrant garments, eager to participate in the festivities. The games, once a source of entertainment for Nero, became an opportunity for the people to reclaim their identity and celebrate their resilience. Chariot races echoed through the Circus Maximus, the cheers of the crowd, a testament to their enduring spirit. Yet, even in the midst of this revival, the shadows of the past remained. The political landscape remained volatile, with Galba's rule challenged by rival factions vying for power. The Senate, eager to assert its authority, found itself in constant conflict with the military, whose loyalty was fickle and easily swayed. The echoes of discontent grew louder, whispering of the potential for further upheaval. As the years rolled on, the memory of Nero continued to haunt Rome. His actions, both reckless and extravagant, served as a cautionary tale, reminding future leaders of the dangers of unchecked ambition. The phrase "as mad as Nero" became a part of the Roman vernacular, a legacy of infamy that transcended time. While his reign had brought destruction, it had also sown the seeds of change, prompting a re-evaluation of power and responsibility. In the quiet moments of reflection, the people of Rome sought to understand the complexities of their history. The ruins of their once great city stood as silent witnesses to the drama that had unfolded, the betrayals, the bloodshed, and the eventual rebirth. The very stones beneath their feet carried the weight of stories untold, echoes of laughter and tears woven into the fabric of their existence. The legacy of Nero, though marked by tyranny, was ultimately a catalyst for change. It ignited a desire for renewal and reform that would shape the future of the Roman Empire. The lessons learned in the aftermath of his rule would inform the decisions of future emperors, reminding them of the delicate balance between power and responsibility. The wounds inflicted during Nero's reign would heal, but the scars would remain, etched into the very history of Rome. As night fell over the city, the flickering torches illuminated the bustling streets, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. The sounds of laughter and music floated through the air, a reminder that life persisted even amidst the ruins. The people of Rome, resilient and determined, embraced the future with a cautious hope. The echoes of the past lingered, but they were no longer shackled by the weight of tyranny. They were free to write their own story, one of renewal, resilience, and the enduring spirit of a city that had weathered the storm. In the months and years that followed, the story of Nero would become a powerful narrative, a cautionary tale told around fires and in crowded taverns. The lessons learned from his reign would ripple through time, shaping the lives of those who came after. Rome, ever resilient, would rise from the ashes, forever marked by its past, but unyielding in its pursuit of a brighter future. The legacy of Nero, complex and multifaceted, became a part of the very essence of the city, an integral chapter in the grand saga of the Roman Empire, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope could endure. In the wake of Emperor Nero's demise, the echoes of his reign reverberated through the annals of history, crafting a legacy that would be both revered and reviled. His end came on June 9, 68 AD, a day that would mark not only the conclusion of his tumultuous rule, but also the beginning of a complex narrative that historians, poets, and playwrights would weave for generations. As he took his own life, uttering the fateful words, "What an artist dies in me," the world was left to ponder the true nature of the man who had once wielded the power of Rome. Nero's legacy was far from straightforward. To some, he became a figure of tyrannical excess, emblematic of the dangers of absolute power. The historian Tacitus, chronicling these events in his annals, painted a portrait of a ruler consumed by vanity and a thirst for adoration. To Tacitus, Nero was a man who prioritized his artistic ambitions over the welfare of his people, who was willing to murder even his closest kin, including his own mother, to secure his position. This view, however, would not be universally accepted. Others would see him through a different lens. As the years turned into decades, and decades into centuries, the myth of Nero evolved. In the popular imagination, he transformed from a mere emperor into a symbol of moral decay and artistic chaos. This shift was not without consequence. The image of Nero fiddling while Rome burned became entrenched in cultural memory, a vivid metaphor for leaders who are detached from the suffering of their subjects. Yet the historical accuracy of this portrayal remained suspect. There is no evidence that Nero played the lyre as his city crumbled around him. Rather, he was reported to have taken action to help the victims of the Great Fire, providing shelter and relief. Still, the image of the callous artist endured, reflecting a deep-seated fear of leadership unchecked by morality. In the centuries following his death, the narrative surrounding Nero continued to be shaped by the political climate of the time. During the Middle Ages, when the Church held significant sway over societal values, Nero became synonymous with the Antichrist. His persecution of Christians led to a perception of him as the ultimate villain, a tyrant whose reign was a cautionary tale for those who might aspire to power without virtue. The playwrights of the Renaissance seized upon this image, crafting dramas that portrayed him as a figure of boundless ambition and tragic downfall. Shakespeare's contemporaries would depict him as a tyrant whose excesses led not only to his own destruction, but also to the moral decay of Rome itself. Yet in this complex tapestry of interpretation, there arose a counter-narrative that championed Nero's contributions to the arts and culture. Some historians began to argue that beneath the tyrant's veneer lay a ruler who sought to elevate Roman culture. His patronage of the arts led to a flourishing of literature and theatre, with Nero himself participating in public performances. The poet Lucan, who lived during Nero's reign, would pen works that not only reflected the era's turmoil, but also celebrated its artistic achievements. This duality in Nero's legacy, tyrant and patron, reflects the complexities of leadership itself, where the line between greatness and ruin often blurs. In the modern era, the fascination with Nero has only intensified. Scholars dissect his life through the lens of psychology, examining his actions as manifestations of deeply rooted insecurities and a desperate need for validation. The theories abound. Was he a product of his environment, shaped by the ambitions of his mother, Agrippina the Younger, or was he an archetype of the artist in power, whose need for expression ultimately led to his downfall? Films, novels, and television series have continued to explore these themes, presenting Nero not merely as a historical figure, but as a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked ambition, the burden of legacy, and the often blurry line between genius and madness. Nero's story has been instrumental in shaping the discourse around leadership and governance. His reign serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of power. The very attributes that may elevate a ruler can also lead to their undoing. The consequences of his actions, both positive and negative, resonate in discussions of modern governance, particularly in how leaders are perceived in the public eye. His life story encourages a critical examination of the relationship between authority and accountability, raising questions that remain relevant today. Moreover, the continued interest in Nero has created a cultural dialogue about the nature of legacy itself. What is left behind when a leader falls? How do we remember those who have wielded power? These questions invite reflection on our own societal values and the ways we choose to honor or vilify our leaders. In a world where information is plentiful, but often distorted, the story of Nero serves as both a historical lesson and a poignant reminder of the importance of narrative in shaping our understanding of the past. As the 21st century unfolds, the fascination with Nero persists in the realms of literature and popular culture. His life has inspired countless works, from the operas of the Baroque period to contemporary novels that reinterpret his story for modern readers. Each retelling breathes new life into his legacy, illustrating how history is not merely a record of events, but a living dialogue that evolves with the times. In these narratives, we find reflections of our own struggles with power, morality, and the quest for meaning in a chaotic world. Yet, for all the intrigue surrounding Nero, one must not overlook the human cost of his reign. The persecution of Christians, the execution of dissenters, and the brutal crackdowns on uprisings left scars on the fabric of Roman society. The cries of the innocent, silenced in the name of power, echo through history as a reminder of what is at stake when leaders prioritize their ambitions over the well-being of their people. The legacy of Nero thus becomes a complex interplay of artistry and atrocity, a cautionary tale that implores us to recognize the weight of our choices. In examining Nero's legacy, we are compelled to confront the duality of the human experience, a struggle between the aspiration for greatness and the moral responsibilities that accompany power. This tension continues to resonate, encouraging us to reflect on our own values and the legacies we wish to leave behind. As we drift into the depths of history, the story of Emperor Nero reminds us that while the echoes of the past may fade, they never truly vanish. They linger, urging us to remember, to learn, and to engage with the complexities of our own narratives. Ultimately, Nero's story is not just one of tyranny and tragedy. It is a mirror reflecting the perpetual dance of light and shadow that defines the human condition. In the quiet moments of contemplation, we find ourselves drawn to his legacy, a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, artistry,